So hello, everyone. My name is Mbonisi Zikhali Zomkhonto. I am originally from Zimbabwe, in the southernmost part of Africa. And I am a poet and a storyteller, a youth mentor as well. I truly believe in storytelling in its broadest sense. And from where I come from, storytellers are considered a very critical part of society. And ever since I started looking inward at my own experience through my poetry and storytelling and the things that I went through, I found out that although I had been writing the way that I had not been immersed in my own story. So today I just wanted to give you this presentation entitled The Story Time You Owe Yourself. So I wanted to first begin with a mantra, right? I want you to think of this in your head, that your story is essentially your gateway to the world, right? But most importantly, beyond that, it is a window into your soul. Now, the two I see as being distinctly different in the way that your story can be angled to the world as this gateway, and when it's used as a window to the soul. So I just want to ask, why the story a gateway? That's my question. Well, if you think of a gateway itself, and what its characteristics were, if you look, for instance, at the ancient gateways that were there, one of the features, of course, the impressive size, so that visitors were either awed or, intimidated. Then you have the decorative features, you have the sculptures, you have the drawings and cave paintings elsewhere. You have defensive capabilities, right? And then you have a strategic location. Where is it? Is it near fortresses? Is it near, and its symbolic significance? That is the gateway characteristics. Then you look at window characteristics now, in thinking of the soul. The windows represent the opening for light and air. So we're letting in all of that natural light. So now it's almost as if it's us being intuitive now. It's us now looking at ourselves inwardly, and with that glass, which is our either our vulnerability, or that glass that is the one that lets in that light that strengthens us, that inward looking, so transparent and translucent, right? And just like the window, framed and supported somehow, all our stories beginning back then when our generations were evolving into this beautiful thing, all of them just had this support around them. However it manifested, as we call it Ubuntu, that spirit of oneness. I am who I am because you are. So that framing structure that holds society together through stories. And then also the varied shapes and sizes that windows coming, and then all the other aesthetic features. So how do I break that down now in looking at storytelling itself? So with our stories, first of all, when we are in touch with the world, we have a certain, sometimes it's almost rehearsed, the way we tell our stories, or the way we relate to each other with others, with other stories, right? So in us projecting to the world, we want that impressive side. Our decorative features are us having some sort of flamboyance in our movement. We want to be colorful. We want to be, the one that lights up the room, right? That's our story. We want our story to be so engaging and so calculated, so that our shine is already seen when we walk in. Then it has the qualities of the dispensive capability, because we don't want the world to be aware that we are this vulnerable. We don't want the world to engage in us in that way. So we hammer out a story, a structured story that is very defensive and runs from the actual us that we know from looking in the mirror, right? And then we also have that never gets to walk out, right? That never gets to walk out and is only known to us. So it's so intimate. And so that transparency and being translucent, it sometimes qualifies itself as removing the blinders, when we are removing the scales, because our story is so raw to us. There's no way that we can fake it to us. It's not a gateway anymore. It's this window, and it has this support around it. We want support. We want balance. We want perspective in our story. We want it to be all of these small pieces we have experienced, the varied shapes and sizes of it. Where we have switched seasons. Sometimes we've been sad, full of grief. Sometimes we have been so joyful. This is the true us that comes and appears in fullness, and its aesthetic features then become inner beauty. So our story is now one that's told from inside, that inner beauty and self-validation, knowing that my story is no longer being dwarfed by some other bigger stories, as we often believe, So that is what it is to me, and what it means to me as a spoken word artist, is to become a conduit for my authentic self to walk through that window of the soul, to open windows to my story, to open myself fully to experience my story and tell it piece by piece, and in every time that I appear as the poet. And one of those key things of that window of the soul is that self-expression. How am I unbottling my emotion? How am I becoming vulnerable to me before I step outside of the door? That's spoken word. What am I writing about? What is its depth? And from where I came from, being a community that's founded on extended family, the most immediate thing after that is, how are my words building community? And that becomes a hard thing to reconcile with, sometimes when I'm trying to marry it to being here, and how things tend to be individualistic sometimes, something that is always a work in progress. But spoken word is also a way to destigmatize yourself. That's the power of it when it's a window to the soul. You're destigmatizing yourself. And there is that tearing of the veil on what you perceived as ugly, the ugly you, what you perceived as the parts that are too insignificant to tell others. Those are the things that some spoken word artists speak about, with that intensity of feeling in it, and the mindfulness, being present in that moment, saying, this is what I'm saying. It's vulnerable. And this is how far I've gone with that vulnerability. This is how I've chosen my worldview. And this is what I did when I stepped into the window of the soul, or when I opened it for the light to come in, right? And then spoken word in its application with me has become empowerment. Not only through what I present when I'm on stage sometimes, or something that I present in the Zooms, or whether something that I'm doing on Clubhouse. All of it is that empowerment, the feeling that I'm controlling my narrative, the feeling that I'm in charge of my vulnerability if I choose to be, or my strengths if I choose to show them, not consistently just showing them to please the outside, but also showing them to be content in my story being heard as another living being. And so part of that for me is to locate the texture of my feelings and emotions. I'll premise this with a story. So December 25, 2015, I became homeless. And it was going to last for about 2.5 years. I haven't really spoken about this a lot. I'm still learning how to. But during that time, all of that experience gave the world this Zomkhonto. There was the one before that was perhaps like at certain times maybe competitive, at certain times maybe boastful a bit about the power to harness words in that way, and maybe sometimes a bit unaware the way I should have been. But that period in time made me so vulnerable that I went to the very depth of feeling without trying, because I was in touch with a different reality to what I had been used to. And so this spoken word reincarnation that came out was more sensitive, more aware, no longer about just the creating of the listening experience. I had been caught up in that, like you see in front of you, the tone, inflection, rhythm, and pacing. I had been, but I was being very, I was being sporty about it. I felt like I was just doing the performance of the person, looking at the sensory experience, making sure that I knew sight, sound, but knowing them only as this external thing, not really something felt deeply, and the use of metaphor, simile, imagery, and all of that. But after that period happened, I started like having an emotional connection attached to my words. There was a sense of agency in some of the things that I started saying. There was a sense of believing that these are not words anymore. It's the looking into the soul. And that became my belief in the strength of personalizing the experience and taking it so far by looking so deeply into people's situations, and then building their rhythm into it, So sometimes the body language that I'm still also learning, because it doesn't really still amount to the expression that I'm trying to define in most of my pieces, because I speak about the community where I was raised, Makokoba, Bulawayo in Zimbabwe. A very, very powerful, moving place with so many deeply moving personal experiences that still hold me in place today. And so that's how I view spoken word. And in light of the mental wellness I was seeking after the trauma of that time, I thought that this was no longer spoken word the way I knew it. So I started referring to it as wellness storytelling when I was talking back to myself, like, I'm telling myself the story to become well. So it was not even the grand reality of it was not me trying to think of some way of re-emerging. No, it was mainly me sitting down, telling myself these stories, so that I can feel well again and re-emerge as this light, And I found that those three elements that worked for me in now remembering childhood and writing those stories again of people, excuse me, of people I know, people that make up the fabric of my being, and also everything I've gone through, and condensing it into these stories. I found that one of the things was proximity. The three is proximity, purpose, and patience. But first of all, it's proximity, So I started asking myself about the things I write. Am I, like, if I'm defining something, how close am I to it? How, if I'm observing someone sitting over there, looking like they're experiencing a moment of distress, what's my involvement, and am I seeing this story as something I'm viewing authentically enough to write it in an authentic way? How emotionally invested am I to it? And then looking at perspective, did I gain a deeper understanding of this subject that I'm writing about? If I am writing about poverty, have I gained the many different nuances of it? Have I compared it to others? Have I seen the depth of emotion that goes through a poor person's day? Then empathy, being the most grateful I am for having experienced and am still learning to experience. But am I connecting with the experiences of others? What emotions are not only evoked in others, but in me? How am I looking beyond, oh, this was a nice piece I wrote, to, oh, what did I say that demands my attention as well? How am I now put into the duty of taking this description and making it something tangible for someone else? Who do I inspire, or where do I get invited to, where this is actually 3 sentences away from influencing policy or something like that, right? You never know how expansive spoken word can be. And my genuine trustworthiness, is it genuine, or am I also imposing myself? Am I writing the story out of mere fascination? Do I have credibility in terms of the story and how I'm telling it? Is it something that I can vouch that this is reliable information and you can quote me on it, right? And then the next one being purpose. What's my central message or idea? What inspired me? What urged me to sit down and write, right? But that's for anyone who's writing a story. Let's say you're writing a story about yourself. Which parts of you are you trying to confront? Is your purpose to look at something in hindsight and say you did better before? Or is your purpose to take the story for the present healing and not think far into the future, like, I need this story to save me? How much do I think my story matters in the grander sense of things? Can it be compelling? Can it be impactful? We most often do not realize how powerful our stories are, often because they remain untold. Either we are afraid that maybe our story is minor, not seeing that there's a network of people telling that very same story in just different ways. So your story is not significant, or maybe you feel it's embarrassing. Maybe we've all been embarrassed that same way in different circumstances, you know? So am I breaking a stigma? What's my purpose? Am I talking, for instance, if I'm talking about racism, if I'm talking about women's rights, if I'm talking about children's rights, what is my stake in it? And am I well informed enough to believe that I have the kind of writing to break a stigma? What stigmas do I still need to also disqualify in my own life so that I can also start the handling of the traumas of my own stigma? How do I destigmatize myself? Am I connecting with an audience? Are we on the same page? And if they have resistance, is there a reason they have to have resistance? You know, and I think purpose is harder for us because the time when the story is actually emerging is the time when we think that our lives have no purpose. But that is where the actual story is writing itself. So even my spoken word, during that time that I mentioned earlier, I didn't write. I didn't like listening to music. I just wanted the day to just, you know, to just progress as, okay. So now, then to realize that once you find a purpose, no matter how minor or insignificant it appears, it gives structure to a certain writing. Not writing because you're writing for anyone else, writing because you're starting to tell yourself your story from the beginning. And then now the last one, which I think is most significant to this kind of healing storytelling that begins with us at the beginning, is creating a safe and supportive space for yourself and others. You know, how do I do it for myself too? How do I create a safe and supportive space for my own voice when I'm by myself? Am I maybe facing a danger of telling my story too soon? We ask ourselves so many things. And then the second one is allowing yourself the time and space to fully explore and understand your emotions and experiences. Like, it's so difficult for us to make time in our day to address just simple things as am I okay today, right? Because we have to go. But when do we allow ourselves to have time for our story, the patience as well, to say, eventually I'm going to have enough time to sit with it until such a time that I can put it either to paper or I can confront it myself, you know. And then also accepting that not everyone may be ready or able to understand or support you at all times, like my brother right there. But, you know, that also comes with being able to accept that your story is not always worth it to every single situation. Your story is much more well sharpened to yourself until you are so confident about it that you can tell everybody else about it as well, right? So now, how then do we convince ourselves that writing a story is something that's easy? Because we are often tongue-tied, right? In most of what happens in life, you know, there's one moment to the next that leaves us speechless sometimes, that leaves us unable to find the right words, such that even the common things appear to be out of view. The common things we can write about, like I can just say, I'm not feeling okay today. And it's a start. You know, it's a start, very common, but a start. You're writing it down, you're journaling something about your state of wellness. And it's a beautiful place to start, right? So the idea is just to remember that having to use those common words does not let your journey be simplified, or story be simplified, or minimize your experience. No, it's just a way to reach out to others and say, hi, this is my story. You know, just the hi, this is my story. I don't have it in place the way that you might expect the story to be or to appear, but it's my story and I've started it this way. With me, because over time, spoken word is something I've practiced over and over and over. I just like have this certain instinct to feel, because I've pushed myself to reach that far. But it's the very same way that we all emote. I just now, just because there's that extra incentive to continuously find the magic of words, I'm consistently communicating at depth to find what other ways to emote using words. And so where would those common words come from, for instance, right? Strip it down to simple things. Like right now, I could be sitting right here fidgeting, you know, that's already, that's a movement. That's already something, oh, I am fidgeting, right? What can you attach to that? Is there a reason to it? Oh, this is the reason. The story is beginning itself, you know? And am I moving fast? Am I hurried? Am I emotionless? You know, all of those, what do they mean to my story? Why am I sluggish all of a sudden? Oh, is it because maybe I could use some more exercise? The story, it's a story. All of that is a story itself. What's my state of mind? What's my mood? Do we always have to create a mood to write? Or do we sometimes sit back and allow our anxiety to come through and let that be the story? What are we feeling? Are we feeling creative? Are we feeling fearful? Are we feeling troubled? All those are stories. All those are stories. Through common words. Anxiety, we talk about it all the time. But do we sit down and write about it? We might think maybe our journaling is not even, our journaling itself is not even recording a story, but that's recording a story. There's some beautiful journals out there that would make amazing, amazing movies, I'm sure, right? How do we relate to others? What's our distance? How do we explain how far we are from our cousins? How do we explain? All of those are stories. Is there a thread about your distance? Why are you distant? Oh, because most of us are immigrants over there. That's a story. That's now an immigrant story. It lends itself to that, right? And are we avoiding others? What's our state? Are we maybe in a depressed state, or are we in a happy place? Are we embracing others and hanging out with others? Are we social butterflies? We write about that. We start from there. What's our relation to time? Do we even have time to wake up and pick up a pen and write something about ourselves? Or are we now in a space where we feel like we have nothing to say? We can't find the words. Are we grounded? Are we actually grounded? Because the storytelling doesn't stop when everything is going well. It doesn't stop when everything is joyful, right? So what's our relation to ourselves? All of those things matter. They matter a huge deal, because then now it helps you now get to yourself to that place of saying, okay, I am going to write now. You know, so you just start with a simple, relatable phrase. You can maybe say, I felt lost, talking about it at different time, right? Everyone can testify to having felt lost, you know. I felt silly. Everybody can testify to having felt silly. So you're creating this connection, right? And what are you saying in terms of sensory language? What we can touch, what we can smell? What are the smells you perhaps have forgotten that you really talk about anymore? Grandmother's cooking. How can that lead you to opening yourself up more when remembering about it? How does it snowball into all these other beautiful writing opportunities simply from remembering certain smells, right? And then sharing your emotions in a very honest way, very honest. So that, because spoken word is seeking to, is seeking to find a home amongst people, so that you can say, oh, I relate to that. I relate to that, you know? And so in that way, you are finding something hopeful together and helping each other in a collective effort towards mental wellness by relating to each other stories, and not letting yourself be distracted by your own stories, because you can be by the traumatic things. You can trigger yourself, but at the same time, you have to go back in a safe way for yourself to try and unlock something, so that you can let your story out, so that you can sit down with yourself and ask yourself questions, so that you can answer them through story, right? And that is what brings me to this part of, then, you know, writing beauty into the parts that you're trying to forgive. So there are some stories that are buried so deep, you know, only because we haven't forgiven ourselves for certain things. And so the story is kind of just like gurgling in the throat, but it's not coming out because we haven't forgiven ourselves to let the floodgates, you know, open. And so how do you become kind to your own imperfections, right? So writing beauty into the parts of yourself you're learning forgive, to me, is to create a sense of that self-acceptance and self-love, you know. So coming back to kind of move the trauma out of the way through a pen stroke, because now you have something you can go back and sit and say, oh, that's what I wrote. Oh, I hadn't actually confronted this in a long time. Then you realize, okay, maybe I'm not ready. You sit back, but what did you do? You were courageous enough to start writing, and trust you me, you will go back and look at it again, you know. And some of this can come from getting community around you that does that. Sometimes it takes a while to get into it, but it's an encouraging community. That's the fun part. A very encouraging community of spoken word artists out there, you know. And so you have to celebrate your progress along the way by writing, and finding new ways to say things. And how does that start? You write with forgiveness, you know, acknowledge your pain. There's such beautiful poetry out there, you know, like people like Andrea Gibson, you know, who write in such ways that like lift you, where they're talking about their pain in a way that arrests you, because you know they're talking about you. You know, such a beautiful way that from acknowledging your pain and sharing it when you're ready, you can actually create something so beautiful. Because into that pain, you plant a new garden. You know, you plant a new garden, because now this pain, as it opens up, it becomes petals of something bigger and more beautiful and brighter. You look for the positive in yourself when you're forgiving yourself with writing, because you can actually say, you know what, yeah, yes, I messed up, and sit with it, you know, because now having written it down, it has forced you to sit with it, embrace your imperfections, embrace them and say, okay, I'm here. All the loudness of all the ugliness that's speaking back to me, I'm putting it in story. I'll sit with it. I'll put it in story. Yes, this, because then you're building the empathy to find beauty in your journey, and how to connect with others through that journey, you know. And in that journey, as you learn more ways of expressing yourself, new ways of looking at things start happening. So how can you go through that journey, right? First, reflect on your own experience of forgiveness. You know, have you forgiven someone? Have you been forgiven? That's something to go back to. That's a story that's waiting to be told back to you. What did that mean at that time? You were able to forgive. Why are you this angry now? You know, or you were forgiven this time. Why that forgiveness didn't happen? And are you making steps towards that forgiveness? Or is it something that will remain in hindsight? Describe a positive memory, you know, that you have of a person or a situation, no matter how bad the outcome might have been. Find yourself just writing a story of that one thing, that is just to challenge yourself. That one thing that you can undoubtedly share with the world, that this person was good at that, or this situation was good for that. It might have been a very, very tough situation that had me on my knees. But the one thing that was very good for it was that I learned how to crawl, and eventually here I am, you know. And that positive thing is what perhaps changed my worldview about the world. So I won't, in my confronting myself, I'll admit to that my worldview changed because of this person. My worldview changed because of that situation, you know. And the fun one that I love is, you know, how to create an imaginary superhero that can do no wrong, or you know. So the one trick is arm them with all the positive things that you wish for yourself, you know. So if there are certain parts that I'm currently lacking, I create that superhero, and their superpowers are what I'm willing to do. Writing a story about that. If I had the superpower of patience, this is what I'll do. And you start moving towards that patience, you know, bit by bit, you know, and then just being mindful, you know, meditate, take a deep breath before writing, center yourself, so that your writing isn't simply just coming from a chaotic state. And that chaotic, because you can be in chaos, but you can write in ways that say, you know what, I'm going to heal. I'm in a chaotic state, I'm going to heal. And so overriding the unforgiven with the beautiful. So moving from saying I'm a mess to saying I'm a work in progress, you know, and spoken word is good for that. It allows you to do that, to say, you know what, I'm a mess, and I'm a beautiful mess that's collecting itself together, you know. I stutter, well, I speak in a beautiful staccato, you know. I'm not enough and I'll never be enough. You counter with the beauty. I'm a sum of very wonderfully made incomplete parts, you know. And so all of those things, using them to slowly speak beauty into those ugly parts of you, and slowly you just start changing. So I'm a work in progress too. I'm always a work in progress. And then now, finally, rehearsing with yourself as audience. Like there's power in telling your story to yourself and then rehearsing it to yourself. It's a beautiful thing. When you actually write, and then you are rehearsing to yourself what you wrote about yourself, to make yourself either feel better or to make sense of a situation. It's such a wonderful feeling. And to write that story means you have a tangible way of reducing anxiety, because you took anxiety from feeling it to to putting it out there. So you've shed off some of that energy. Then you also identify areas of improvement. You can hear that my voice is kind of quivering here. You know, I'm not speaking with confidence. And you can find that a lot by rehearsing to yourself. You know, practice how to reflect by yourself. Think of moments that you've been happy about deeply, not just on the surface, like really deeply sit and say, okay, you know what? I did good at that time. How does it link in with my story now? How can I write it into being like, how come I felt so good at that time and I'm feeling this way right now? So connecting with your emotions, basically connecting deeply, intrinsically with your emotions. And of course, this it just takes, you record yourself, you hear yourself over and over again, listen to your voice, just hear yourself talk about things like trauma and hear how you feel about it. Are you ready to feel that raw emotion by yourself? If you're still afraid of how strongly it's coming, then that means that you have to be kind on yourself. Don't be pressured by anyone, like you have to get this story out. No, a story whispers in its own way, or with shouts, and whichever way that it comes, the story will come differently to everybody else. And whether it's poetry, or whether it's stories, fiction, or non-fiction, whatever it is, the story comes at its own time, and we have to be patient with that story. Visualize your audience, speak as if you're speaking to a lot of people when you're actually speaking to yourself. Have those conversations and see the crowd going wild, anticipating the beauty of your story. It's all just part of, encouraging yourself in your story. Like, my story matters. You imagine someone listening to it and saying, this story is authentic. This story relates in such a profound way, right? So rehearse in different locations to get a feel of whether your story will be interrupted if there's noise, or whether your story will flood way too much when there's silence, and it will be too much to bear. And then when you're ready, you can get feedback from the people that you trust, the people that that you can give your story, and your story is safe with them. And so that is my presentation today. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that somehow I influenced you into believing that a story is something golden, and a story is something to treasure. Whether we can't write it as yet, let's just keep putting a word after a word after word. Thank you very much.